I would like to welcome Dr. Peter Vandenberg. He's an associate professor in transportation and logistics at the Rotterdam School of Management. It's an Erasmus University. And he obtains his Master of Science in Economics and Operation Research from VU University Amsterdam and his PhD in Applied Mathematics from Delft University of Technology. His research focuses on application of operation research of public transportation operations and emergency service providers. He will show us a boost for urban sustainability, optimizing electric transit bus networks in Rotterdam. You are very welcome.
Thank you. Yeah, so it's very nice to be here. Can you all hear me? Yeah. Okay, so I think my talk nicely relates to the first talk of this session because another sector that needed to translate into electric vehicles was actually the public transport sector, and in particular electric bus networks. And I will share basically our experience working together with the public transport operator in Rotterdam in their electrification of their bus network. And this started really in 2016 when public transport operators in the Netherlands reached an agreement with the Dutch government that they would electrify their public transport network before the year 2025, at least for new buses, and 2030 for existing buses as well. And even though they were part of the agreement, they were faced with enormous challenges of actually how to get this done. It was like 10 years' time to completely change the operation for this electrified bus networks. And the public transport operator in Rotterdam decided to go for a fast charging network because they soon recognized that it was not possible to just keep the original schedule and try to operate them with electric buses. I think, as already mentioned in the first talk, like 8-hour shifts of operating is not possible with electric trucks at the moment. And actually the buses they operate for longer than 8-hour shifts. So they soon realized that they needed fast charging during their actual operations. And that's where we came in to help them really focus on when and where to charge these buses. So that was mainly the problem description that we were facing. There were many other challenges that they faced in this electrification, but the one that they more or less assigned to us as a university was about the charging strategy. So where, when, and how long should each bus charge during their regular operation so that they, first of all, have an operational feasibility, so the bus will actually be able to finish all the trips that they had, but in the meantime also think about grid integration. So maybe it's not a smart idea to charge all these buses with fast chargers at the same time and do that at a time that the grid is already short on supply. So to kind of integrate the two was the ambition that they had for their public transport. Okay, they did that first in two phases. So the city of Rotterdam is nicely separated by the river Maas. And the first set of 50 buses that they would operate at the northern end of the city. And interestingly enough, in the second part, they focused on the southern part, but for the two, they really took a different approach. So for the northern network, they decided to really scatter the charging over multiple different terminal stations. So they had 6 different terminal stations with chargers, and each of them would only have 1 or maybe 2 bus lines that actually charge at that particular location. But in the second phase, they had a really different network where they had one central station where all the bus lines would come, and that would be the only location with chargers. And as you will see later in this presentation, that also gave different opportunities and challenges for the actual operations. Okay, so let's first focus on the northern network that was operational in 2019. So here they had 47 buses on 7 different lines. And the charging was done at 6 different terminal stations. And what they soon realized was that there is a lot of uncertainty actually about the energy consumption of these buses, but also on the regular delays that they have. And if a bus has a delay, it might actually cause them to miss its charging moment, and it might have a big impact on the state of charge of the buses. So the research questions that we had was, first of all, do we actually need to optimize charging schedules, or can we maybe just do common sense approaches like just the first bus that arrives at the terminal station for charges, it just takes the available charging slot if it is there, and otherwise it doesn't? Or do we really need to find the interaction between the different buses and really optimize this charging schedule? And second, what is the impact of this uncertainty, and do we need real-time adjustments, or can we maybe just be a bit more conservative in the planning and then hope for the best when operating the schedule? So really, what is the impact of this uncertainty on real-time operations? Okay, for this we developed a framework where we could, as an input, take the network structure and the actual trips that the buses would need to take. And we also incorporate the stochasticity or the uncertainty in the delays for buses and the energy consumption. And we were interested in the number of charging events that they had, operational feasibility, and some other grid integration measures. And we compared multiple different strategies. So the first two are, I would say, common sense approaches that you can more or less directly apply. For example, just the first bus that comes in gets a charging slot, and that's it. Then the second one is slightly smarter. There we kind of also take into account the current state of charge of the bus, so that if a bus is charging that doesn't really need it, it can be replaced by another bus that arrives later. And then we have two optimized schedules where we really come up with mathematical optimization models to decide which bus should charge when, where we distinguish two different options. Either one schedule that we'd make at the beginning of the day and we just stick with it the whole day, or one where we kind of re-optimize during the day so that if a certain bus misses a charging moment at the beginning of the day, maybe we can make up for that later during the day. Right, so that's the logic of these four strategies that we considered. And after first analysis, we found that there might be more like a middle ground where you say we optimize a charging schedule, but then in real time let it up to the driver whether they need to charge or not. So we give them a more or less like a threshold card, and they say if you are at a certain station at a certain time, look at your state of charge, and that determines whether or not you want to charge your bus or not. Okay, so these are the strategies that we tested. And we started off with, in the initial situation, they were very, very conservative because they had no clue what was going on, what they could expect. So you could say that they had a lot of chargers at the different terminal stations. So there was not really a capacity issue there. So you could just more or less assume that every bus that came into a station, there would be a charger available. And in that situation, we see that just charging whenever you can would lead to the fewest infeasibilities, right? You would basically charge whenever, and your buses will make it to the end of the day. But you also see that has quite a bit more impact on the grid. You need way more charging events. So that conservative approach might not lead to buses being out of energy, but it might not be a good solution for the future. So you see that in the optimized versions, there might be some buses that run into trouble, so you might need to have one backup bus. But you also see that the grid load of these fast chargers is actually reduced quite significantly. So where this balance is maybe not clear yet, but if we look at a more future scenario where you would reduce the number of chargers, so there would actually be competition, like not every bus can charge at every moment, then you see that even just first in, first served, just charging whenever you can, would not necessarily lead to feasible operation. So you might actually really need some optimization there. You might need to real-time adjustments to make sure that you can actually make a feasible operation. Okay, so that's what they did in the end. They did implement a system at least to have some real-time control over the state of charge of the buses and let that influence the charging schedule. Okay, then the second set was the southern network where they had one central station where they would do all the charging. And that also opened up an opportunity to maybe have like a solar park there that you would more or less generate renewable energy and directly use that to charge your buses. And the main question there was, how well do these two align? So can we actually match our charging with the renewable energy generation so that we indeed charge our buses with our own renewable energy? And they were also considering maybe we need like a battery or an energy storage system at that station so that we make sure that we can use more of this renewable energy for charging the buses. So that's what we looked at. And for this, we went for the basic scenario where we say, okay, there are enough chargers. Every bus that comes in will just charge and just see what happens. So how well is this renewable energy actually aligned with the charging of the buses? And this is what we saw. So the darker one is the one where you just charge everything from the grid. And the two lighter ones are the ones where you also have the renewable energy from your own solar park and potentially also have a battery. Okay, so you see that especially in summer, for a large extent, you can indeed use this renewable energy. And there does not seem to be too much of an issue with the alignment between the two, except for the early morning and the late evening when the sun might already be down, but you still need to charge your buses at some point. Then I think interesting observation here for the use of this energy storage system, so this battery, when does that one actually lead to the highest benefit? And that's what you see in this line. And interestingly enough, you see that in spring and autumn, the benefit of the battery is actually more than during winter and summer. So somehow you see that the best moment for this battery is really when there is not so much renewable energy that you can never discharge it, but there should be enough renewable energy that you can charge it at certain moments. So really this balance between not too much renewable energy and not too little is the moment where a battery could be a good solution for such a system. Okay, and with that I will conclude. So our experience in Rotterdam was really that electrifying your transit bus network really requires a complete redesign of your network. It might be beneficial to optimize your charging schedule, to really think about when to charge these buses. And it's not enough to just come up with a one-off optimization, but it's really important to, in real time, change your charging schedule, because you don't really know which bus will run into a delay, which one will have a higher energy consumption than expected. And that is really important in actually defining your real-time adjustments. And renewable energy can also be used to really maybe alleviate the impact on the grid. And in some cases, the battery can help. But in our particular use case, I think the impact of actually storing energy was not too much, mainly because there were always buses charging at the station. Because there are so many buses there, you can use most of your renewable energy directly for your buses. And with that, I would like to conclude. So.
Thank you, Peter Vandenberg. Proper logistic is and was always very important for proper transport. Will this dependency even grow in future?
Yeah, so there definitely is interaction between logistics and transportation, and you might say it will increase mainly because mobility is getting more and more individualized, right? And I think that requires, in the back end, a lot more involved logistical processes. So in that sense, I think it might indeed grow in the future because just more planning is needed for like this individualized mobility.
Okay, thank you very much. Welcome now with me, Professor Dr. Meike Jipp from the Institute of Transport Research at German Aerospace Center, DLR. Meike Jipp is a professor for transport demand and transport impacts at Technical University of Berlin. She is on leave to be director of the Institute of Transport Research at the German Aerospace Center, DLR. In her research, Meike Jipp concentrates on human transport behavior. Why and how are humans mobile? How can one design transport systems to prevent negative impacts and foster positive ones? Meike Jipp studied psychology at Mannheim University in Germany and Carleton University in Canada. She will talk about a chance for livable cities. I'm looking forward to that. Welcome.
Hello, everyone. Good afternoon. Thank you very much for the kind introduction. It's my pleasure to be with you today and give you some insights into our research about sustainable mobility, a chance for livable cities. To motivate this work, I want to bring you back into the year 2017, a time where we weren't aware of COVID yet, and our mobility behavior wasn't influenced by it. And if we look at mobility in Germany in 2017, we see that each single person in Germany was mobile for 39 kilometers each single day, independent from the actual work day. We were mobile because we were accompanying other people, we were going to work, we were on business trips, we went to a place to educate ourselves. And if you look at exactly the kilometers, we actually see that 8 of these 39 kilometers were work-related, another 7 kilometers were business-related, and, for instance, 13 kilometers were related to leisure activities. So it's quite actually a lot, and when you look into the details of these 39 kilometers, it's actually 3.3 trips where we spread these 39 kilometers. And each single one of us had a chance to take the car, to take the bus, to ride the bike, to take the train, or to actually walk. Well, when you look at the 39 kilometers, you'll easily find out that it's probably a bit too long to walk, at least for a business trip. So people were deciding about how they executed these trips. And when you look again at the statistics, you will see that there is a huge green bar graph, which says 43%. 43% of these trips were conducted by driving the own car. Another 14% were basically as a passenger in the car. So the car is actually the winner in this game, at least in 2017. When you look into how these trips were spread across the different regions in Germany, you see that in Germany, a bit more than 60% of the population lives in city areas, a bit more than 40% lived in rural regions. And when you look at the traffic volume and the traffic performance, you see that there is an issue in the cities. It's a bit more than 60% of all the traffic that's conducted in Germany that takes place in the cities. So there's something we have to do about it. And when I look into the city where I live today, the city center looks like this. And I guess we all agree that it's not a very nice place. It was a lucky time because typically you see more cars, but you don't see a lot of people. You hardly see a bus, and you really have to look careful to see the bikes. And that's a typical German city, and it's actually depending on the mobility by car. So what we did is we started looking at this picture, and we're wondering, how can we actually change this picture? And we started inventing a new center of the city. What we did, basically by drawing, was removing the cars, implementing some green areas in that place, implementing cargo bikes, cafes where people can actually meet and talk, and some new type of vehicle concepts, and a bus stop. So what I would like to do within the scope of this presentation, give you some insights into the details of that picture. The land allocation, for example, changes. The vehicle concepts change. I guess none of you has one of these cars that's depicted here in that picture. What you can certainly imagine, what we've also heard in the talks before, is that the propulsion technology changes. We have different mobility services, and of course, we're also counting on automation technology. And all these bits and pieces help us actually in designing livable cities. So let's have a closer look into these details. And I want to start with the land allocation problem. Now I'm jumping to Berlin. What you see here is a part of the city map of Berlin. And we asked some participants to drive their bike along that road that you can see here in that picture. And if you look at the details of that picture, you see that we started on the left lower part of that map. It's a typical area similar to the one that you saw on the previous slide. And then it continued driving on a park-related area. And you see these, well, typically yellow, red dots. And they depict basically the noise and the particle emissions that the people were confronted with when they drove with their bike through that area. And when you see here, especially in the city-like areas, there was more noise and the particle emissions were higher. And then we asked, how did you feel when you were driving through that area? And we found some quite interesting quotes. At the beginning of that street, people were complaining about being trapped between the buildings and the streets. Others were complaining about the construction sites, and they had to find their way through the construction sites. And it's also quite interesting to see that they drove faster. It seemed as if they wanted to get through that ugly area. And the picture totally changed when they were in this parking lot area. What they saw here, they liked to see the sky. They liked to see other people just relaxing, enjoying their lives. And what happened here is they slowed down, and they actually enjoyed their ride. So if you want to convince people to use their bike, then you should generate cities like this, where you see the sky, where people relax, and then you'll see cyclists that drive a bit slower and that enjoy cycling. Certainly cycling is not well suited for each single situation when you look at mobility behavior. But here the vehicle concept comes into place. What we also see is that you can have different types of cargo bikes for mobility, not only mobility of people, but also for transporting goods. I have an example here from Hamburg, a project we conducted with the city cleaning services. And you're going to see here in the pictures different types of cargo bikes that you can use to clean, for example, the parks of Hamburg. And when you investigate the cleaning season, you see on the left-hand side on the top a part of the city of Hamburg in a traditional way and in a new way on the right-hand side. And we asked the city cleaners to actually use e-cargo bikes to clean the city. Actually, the people working in the city cleaning liked using a cargo bike because they received positive feedback from the population. It's more enjoyable as a person enjoying the park to have an e-cargo bike rider cleaning the city instead of a truck driver driving through the green areas. But what was, in addition, quite surprising is that the costs were actually smaller for using the cargo bikes than for using the trucks. And of course, the CO2 emissions were lower as well. So in any kind of perspective, it's an added value for the cities if you use cargo bikes for cleaning the cities instead of trucks. So herewith, we can actually gain some space. And they're not only e-cargo bikes, you can also run cargo bikes with hydrogen. So what we're doing at DLR as well is to develop hydrogen propulsion for cargo bikes and to evaluate their suitability in different European cities. So that's one of the prototypes that you can see here in the slides. Okay, we can also use different type of vehicles for public transportation, also for different needs people might have in these public transportation systems. This is a concept that we actually developed for a project in the south of Germany, in the area of Stuttgart, where we implemented a demand-responsive transportation system. And what we did here, that's the real prototype, is we implemented this prototype that would pick you up at any time of the day when you wanted to be picked up and drives you wherever you want to be driven to. And we evaluated, for example, the acceptance. And this level of acceptance actually increases over time. This is the good news. The bad news is it takes a while. On the left picture on the lower side, you see the results from the questions in May 2018. On the right-hand side, the same questions from October 2018. So it's quite a time frame in between. And the people in May 2018 were very satisfied for an average of 12%, and this number increased to 22% within these 6 months. So you have to stand through a less nicer time period. There is another issue that we found out. The intention to use these public transportation systems is excellent for leisure activities, when it doesn't matter when you're late. It's not that good actually for important appointments. When humans are afraid that they would be late, they won't use such a system. So the question now is, how can we actually increase the trust into these services? And that's actually when automation comes into play. That's a similar, vehicle concept. It's a Wizard of Oz vehicle, where it's actually the driver's hidden, so passengers might think that this vehicle drives autonomously. And the purpose for trying out such a vehicle is to actually ask humans, how do you feel in a autonomously driven vehicle? And to check whether they would accept such technology as well. And when you simulate this service in Berlin again, you will see that it's quite a good add-on for the public transportation system as we know it today. If we implement such a system for last and first miles, it has quite high intention to be used. And the good news is as well that humans actually accept such technology. They want to use it. But they also have quite high expectations with regard to cost structures, so it should be quite cheap. There are high expectancies with regard to privacy and availability. So it really has to be available very often and very flexibly. Nevertheless, if we manage to implement such systems, it has a chance to actually draw people from their own car into the public transportation system. And herewith, we can hopefully save some space. And the space can then be used for, again, different land allocation schemes in order to actually make such visions become real. And that's hopefully when such visions can become reality, also in the city where I live, and hopefully also in the cities where you live. And just to give you another picture of how it looks again today, it's in the right-hand slide, lower right side of that slide. And herewith, I would like to thank you very much for your attention. I'm curious for your questions and also for the discussions later on.
Thank you, Meike. This was very interesting. I have a question. In times of home office, how much do you think do we need transport and this mobility concepts?
Yeah, that's a very good question. Thank you very much. I think it's quite an interesting time we're currently living in, because what we also see that connection between the place where you live and the place where you work is less strict than before the COVID pandemic. So what we observe is that people move away outside of the city, so they travel less often, but longer distances. So in some, it might be the same. So yes, we need it.
Thank you very much. Yes, now we start the sessions with the round tables. So the presenters will be available at their tables. We will have in total 8 round tables. So you see the numbers here. And the topic is listed here with a number, so you can correlate the number to the table. In addition to the 4 tables of the presenters, there are, for example, table 5 to 8, underground transportation of goods into urban areas. Number 6 is planning for urban air mobility. Number 7, transport transition to sustainability, a Berlin example. And 8, mobility made UX-based mobility concepts for commercial quarters. So please distribute to the tables and enjoy and discuss, and we are interested on the outcome. Thank you very much.